We're all dealing with the pandemic, whether rich or poor. But Chinese President Xi Jinping says closing the gap between developing and developed countries is a prerequisite for global prosperity. Well, he mentioned this and many other things. Let's unpack them now. And I'm joined by Martyn Davies from Deloitte. Dr. Davies, good morning, and thank you very much. There's a couple of things I'd like to unpack with you on the back of these special dialogues that the World Economic Forum has been holding. We saw our President Ramaphosa yesterday also addressing a session. But let's start with what President Xi Jinping said just 2 days ago in that thing, where he spoke about the need to close the gap between developing and developed countries as a prerequisite for global prosperity. I mean, looking at the challenges that the pandemic has exacerbated and exposed, how do you close the gap?
Sure. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a tough one. It's an insurmountable challenge almost at the moment. I mean, my biggest fear is one of which I think President Xi Jinping was echoing, is one of sort of long-term marginalization of many developing world countries. Let's call them the global south. As of last week, I think it was a weekend, there were 51 countries that were currently rolling out vaccination programs within their societies. That's obviously, most of those countries in Africa, simply we don't make the list. So I'm afraid that economic certainty and integration almost into the global economy, think flows of tourism, trade, commerce, etc., they only come about when we have a sort of a herd immunity through vaccination programs. Without that certainty, I'm afraid, it's more of the same and an increased divergence, I'm afraid, between the sort of global north and the much poorer south. And the Chinese clearly are pushing multilateralism here. Yes,
they're pushing multilateralism, and many people are hoping that with Joe Biden going to White House, he'll also get the United States to again be more on a multilateral perspective. But on a COVID-19 vaccine, as you say, 51 countries in the world are rolling out, and none of the global south, or the poor, emerging, developing, whatever name you use to describe these countries, make that list. Africa is not even there. The president yesterday, that's Ramaphosa, appealing for a stop to the hoarding of the vaccine by some of the rich nations and condemning vaccine nationalism. I mean, that's a manifestation of this global gap between the North and the South, isn't it?
That may be the case, but we are seeing progress in many countries in Latin America, which are equally poor to ourselves, who are being able to effectively roll out this vaccine. Even countries like Brazil, for example. So I don't think there's vaccine nationalism may be certainly is a real trend that's taking place. It's sort of every country or every man for himself kind of mentality. But it just talks to lack of planning. If we get to this stage and we still haven't got a timetable, I'm afraid, one could say we've been asleep at the wheel. And I think that is the case. There's obviously a financing issue. There's a manufacturing issue. Countries like India have pre-existing very sizable manufacturing sectors for pharmaceutical products, well positioned. But thirdly, and most importantly, I think it's a question of functionality of government. And this is not just governments individually, but coming back to the point of multilateralism, this is a global crisis, obviously, but I think countries need to act also within their own specific regions. So what are we seeing from SADC, for example? What are we seeing from the African Union? And times like this, you start to test the functionality of not just your own government, but also these institutions as well.
Yeah, I mean, there are other challenges that Africa is facing. Among them, as you say, is cooperation. Even President Xi Jinping talking about the need to ramp up global cooperation, different levels. But we do have this huge challenge, of course, of COVID-19. And let's not forget, climate change is still very much with us. We've just experienced Tropical Storm Eloise just now, and we're still suffering the after effects and how these are becoming more and more intense over time. But when you come to the continent of Africa, you talk about planning. And I've seen a comment from you in the context of the World Economic Forum around the new African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is supposed to have been kicking in January, at the beginning of this month. Before I get your insights, let's just listen to what President Ramaphosa had to say yesterday when he was asked at the special dialogues of the World Economic Forum what he hoped the African Continental Free Trade Agreement would achieve. Let's take a listen.
The Free Trade Area Agreement is one of those I would call revolutionary sea change initiatives that the African continent has embarked upon. And if I think about the formation of the the OAU, which was formed many years ago by our forebears in 1963, this is possibly the most important initiative that the African continent has embarked upon. Our forebears, our founders, wanted Africa to act together, to be integrated, and it has taken us some time to arrive at that. And integration means much more when it affects the economic lives of the countries of the continent. We're a market of 1.2 billion people, and it's a growing market, as seen by everyone around the world. It's a youthful market, and it's a market of people who want to go forward and grow their economies and grow their countries. And this is a great advantage to us as the African continent.
Okay, that's President Ramaphosa yesterday. Dr. Davies speaking there, the World Economic Forum Special Dialogues, talking about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, saying it's one of the biggest, most important things to come at this time. You've had some insights about it as well. You've been looking at it. Do you share that hopefulness in the President's voice there?
Well, it all comes down to execution, doesn't it? And looking at, you mentioned the crises the continent regularly faces, or even at a country level or at a regional level, and how capable are African states or African regional economic communities, think SADC, ECOWAS, EAC, COMESA, amongst others, who are able to address issues and act effectively. And the answer, I'm afraid, they often fall short. So I agree, President Ramaphosa is entirely correct. The free trade arrangement agreement ambition, which kicked off on Jan 1st this year, is probably the most ambitious global free trade project since the WTO was formed in the 1980s. So, and I say that just because of the sheer challenges involved. But I think the point to note is that this is should be the absolute, post-COVID, should I say, fundamental economic priority of the continent, in the same way that internal liberalization of trade enhanced the competitiveness and boosted the economy of China and India, respectively. We should see Africa in a similar light, a fragmentation of so many different countries, separate economies. And it's only through good infrastructure rollout, efficient services, and trade liberalization we can start to break these barriers to trade down. A rising tide of trade ultimately will undoubtedly lift all boats. But countries have to be on board. They have to implement. We can't have the nonsense of 2-3 week delays at border posts, dysfunctional border posts, bad infrastructure. That doesn't work, I'm afraid. So we need to have, I think, small wins in the short term at key border posts where there's heavy traffic, and start to scale from there.
Thank you very much. Dr. Martyn Davies from Deloitte, some of the insights there about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and of course, and about what President Xi Jinping of China had to say at the World Economic Forum.